Did you just say that the whistleblower or the informant is now missing?
Well, we're hopeful that we can find the informant. Now, remember, these informants are kind of in the spy business, so they don't make a habit of being seen a lot or being high profile or anything like that.
The report, interestingly, actually says it makes sense for the FBI to have examined this initial tip they got from an Australian diplomat, which, frankly, is in some ways a walkback from other suggestions Durham has made in the past. I think the report is actually fairly cautious and not particularly critical on what was supposed to be his biggest criticism, which is that the case never should have been opened at all. But that's not actually what the report ends up saying.
Well, former President Trump, as I'm sure you've seen on his website, Truth Social, said Durham concludes the FBI never should have launched the Trump-Russia probe, exclamation point. In other words, the American public was scammed. Again, to the point you're making, that's not what this report is indicating.
No, and in fact, as I read the Durham report, what he's basically arguing is the FBI should have opened a preliminary report as preliminary investigation as opposed to a full investigation. That's a fine distinction, but I think only lawyers and agents care about that level of granular detail, and I don't think in the end it matters that much. Their point is that they have already instituted a significant number of changes to policies and practices where there were things that were found to be wrong and shouldn't have happened. And frankly, most of the people who made those decisions are long gone from the FBI.
Devlin Barrett of the Washington Post, thank you so much for being here.
He just released this lengthy final report. It runs about 300 pages, and it's a dud.
Have you ever wondered how scientists make this from this? We sat down with a team of researchers to figure out how this works and why they're doing it. This team has cracked the code of making plastic truly sustainable.
The material that we're using as the ink for the printer is the same liquid that we showed in the test tubes. Once it gets to the thickness, the viscosity that we need, we load it in these little barrels and we put it into the printer.
By using this process, you can melt down a broken piece of plastic and remake it without any new material. But why would we need this? Researcher Pranav Krishnan offers us a real-life example. He says most wind turbine blades today are reaching the end of their life cycle. These blades can be larger than 50 meters long. When these blades break, our only solution is to toss them in the landfill. But with this process, you can deconstruct the blade and reprint them, good as new.
Deconstruct them once they reach the end of their life cycle, put it back, build a whole new wind turbine blade, and your sustainable energy is now actually sustainable.
I'm Ben Meiselas from the Meidastouch Network. Earlier in the day, Fox had on a guest, Mark Thiessen, a former George W. Bush speechwriter and right-wing Fox commentator.
So you can punch the left and deliver results for the right, and that's possible.
Yeah. New York Times says DeSantis impresses in Iowa, showing up in an absent Trump. Just got a couple seconds here, Mark. Was it that good for the New York Times to write that?
I don't think the New York Times, most Republican voters don't care what the New York Times says, and so I don't think that's going to have much impact on the election. But look, it's good. He's showing up. Keep in mind, Donald Trump lost Iowa the last time around.
So notice what Mark Thiessen says there about why he's supporting Ron DeSantis. And he says the first reason he wants to support Ron DeSantis are all of those anti-woke policies. He thinks those policies are great, going after the woke, even though Ron DeSantis and really no one on the right wing can even define what woke is. It's a boogeyman that they create and they get angry about. That is what Mark Thiessen says is a great attribute that Ron DeSantis has. The next thing he says is great about Ron DeSantis is that he angers people on the left. Remember, they're not talking about what Ron DeSantis' actual policies are, what he's doing in terms of jobs and healthcare, and if he's actually helping the people of Florida. The focus is that he's making people on the left angry, right? And then the third thing that Mark Thiessen says is that DeSantis is capable of winning, and then he says Trump is a loser. But here's the thing. Fox has spread the big lie that the election was rigged against Donald Trump. So to the Fox viewers and the Trump supporters, they don't believe Donald Trump even lost because Fox engaged in defamatory conduct and lied to its viewers. That is how they've aided and abetted this fascism. By the way, even Ron DeSantis won't reject the notion that the election was rigged. Even Ron DeSantis won't, when asked the most basic question, that do you acknowledge that Trump lost and there wasn't all of this fraud that he's talking about, Ron DeSantis can't say yes to that. He can't acknowledge that Trump lost. He was asked this question today, just after the segment that I just showed you aired. Ron DeSantis was holding a press conference where he was signing into law a new bill that would outlaw DEI initiatives or teaching in public universities. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But when he was asked this question by reporters, do you acknowledge that Trump lost and there wasn't all this fraud that he talks about, Ron DeSantis responded like this. Play this clip.
You said during an event in Iowa over the weekend that the GOP needs to reject a culture of losing. Do you acknowledge that Trump lost and there wasn't all this fraud that he talks about?
Well, I look at the last however many election cycles. 2018, we lost the House. We lost the Senate. 2020, Biden becomes president. Or no, excuse me, we lost the Senate in 2020. Biden becomes president and has done a huge amount of damage. Very unpopular in 2022. And we were supposed to have this big red wave. And other than like Florida and Iowa, I didn't see a red wave across this country. And so I think the party has developed a culture of losing. I think that there's not accountability. And I think in Florida, we really showed what it takes to not just win big, and then deliver big. And ultimately, when you're doing all this, What results are you producing for people? That's really what matters. You can sit there and talk about cable news, social media, all these other things that people are fixated on. And for me, it's like, okay, what's that true north? You obviously got to win. Otherwise, you don't get a ticket to the dance. But once you do that, how are you going to be able to actually bring about big change to make people's lives better? Next.
That was today, folks. That just happened. It happened right after Donald Trump posted that on a social media platform, right after Fox was out there calling Donald Trump a loser through Mark Thiessen when Ron DeSantis was asked the question, so is Donald Trump a loser? Did he lose? Do you acknowledge that he lost? DeSantis goes, oh, I just think the party has a culture of losing. He can't even say it. He can't even bring himself to say it. Oh, and by the way, that press conference that he was at, this is from Washington Post. DeSantis signs bill to defund DEI programs at Florida public colleges. This is what it says about DeSantis. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill into law on Monday that would bar the state's colleges and universities from spending money on diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and limit how race can be discussed in many courses. The move comes amid a larger conservative attack. Again, never call this behavior conservative, by the way. Anytime someone says it, let's replace the word. The move comes amid a larger fascist attack on higher education. Much better. DEI programs, which DeSantis and others say reinforce racial divisions and promote liberal orthodoxy. Supporters of the program say they are critical to serving the nation's increasingly diverse student populations. What's this gaslight? You want to serve the diverse populations by removing diversity? Quote, if you look at the way this has actually been implemented across the country, DEI is better viewed as standing for discrimination, exclusion, and indoctrination, DeSantis said at that news conference that I just showed you. The bill will end the whole experiment of DEI in the state of Florida. Have you seen this video of Jenna Barbee? She is the teacher, first-time teacher. She showed her students a Disney movie, and after showing her students a Disney movie, she's now being investigated by the Florida Department of Education. Have you seen this video? Let me just show you this and watch what happened in her own words. This is the Florida teacher Jenna Barbee, who showed the students a Disney movie, and now she's being investigated for indoctrination. Play this clip.
Hi, my name is Jenna Barbee. I'm the teacher that is under investigation with the Florida Department of Education for indoctrination for showing a Disney movie. I just wanted to come here and tell you my truth, my story about what actually happened. So I'm a first-year teacher and a first-time mom, so needless to say, had a lot of learning to do this year. So how the situation came to be, our students had standardized testing all morning. So some students didn't finish. So in the afternoon, part of my students who didn't finish went to a different teacher's classroom, and she split her kids amongst the other 5th grade teachers. So due to the fact that they spent their morning state standardized testing, I had a lot of students not in my room who typically are, and I had another teacher student in my room. I thought it would be a great time to give them a brain break by showing a movie that related to what we were learning about in school. Other 5th grade classes did this as well. So I want to bring up the issue that I'm in trouble for. I was told by every teacher and mentor at our school that our method for approval by administration of showing movies was to have a signed parent permission slip for PG movies. I had that from the beginning of the year. The whole 5th grade team had signed permission slips for PG movies with no objections to specific content. I actually had one student who did have objections to specific content, not showing the Buzz Lightyear movie, but she wasn't in my classroom anymore, so it wasn't a big deal. The reason I was turned in is because one of the split students was a school board member's daughter. That school board member is currently on a rampage to get rid of every form of representation out of our schools. She even spent days this past week going to all the high schools to get rid of anything that had to do with representation whatsoever. She even had admin escort her to a teacher's classroom that had a sticker of a black hand and a white hand holding hands, and the white hand had a different color fingernail for every finger. So the school board member called the Department of Education on me for indoctrination before ever coming to our school to talk with me or admin about the situation. I chose this movie because it relates to our curriculum. Our unit at the time was earth science and ecosystems and how they interact. Plants, humans, animals. So this movie's perfect. My thought process was, what a better way to showcase all these standards, along with huge lessons of overcoming differences, spreading kindness, communication, and chasing your dreams, a lot of which are in our social emotional Florida Best standards as well. Is a character in the movie LGBTQ? Absolutely. Is that why I showed it? No. I have a lot of 5th grade students who have come to me this year, long before showing this movie, talking about how they're part of that community as well. And it's not a big deal to me, so I just said, okay, that's awesome, do you. Not pushing anything, just being accepting. That's what I do. Does that have anything to do with why I showed it? Not in the slightest. The LGBTQ aspect of the movie, they're harmless. It's just a talked about crush, and it's only a couple lines in total scene time of just over 2 minutes. The parents in the movie kiss a lot, and that wasn't even brought up, and that's the issue. I also want to bring up the fact that none of my students cared or batted an eye. They didn't even know this was a big deal until the board member and the state made it a big deal. They're using it against me, saying they're protecting the children and it's for their safety. But what is this actually showing them? Their teacher showed a movie to help them connect to our curriculum and learn some valuable life lessons. But the minor representations that have nothing to do with the movie are such a big deal that now admin is in their room, pulling their teacher out, calling the students one by one down to the office to interrogate them in the middle of my lessons. And now there is an investigator from the Florida Department of Education coming to pull my students out of class again to investigate them individually. And by the way, they don't even have to have a signed parent permission slip for that. Do you know the trauma that is going to cause to some of my students? They are 5th graders. Some of them can barely come up and have a conversation with me and are just getting comfortable with me, and now an investigator is allowed to come and interrogate them? Are you kidding me? What is that showing them? This is the public education system, where students from all backgrounds, cultures, and religions are welcomed and should be celebrated and represented. I am not and never would indoctrinate anyone to follow my beliefs. I will, however, always be a safe person to come to that spreads the message of kindness, positivity, and compassion for everyone. That is the key to the safety for our children. That is the key message that everyone needs to find in their heart and understand. I was taking stuff off the walls the other day, and I had a student come to me and say, Miss Barbee, why are you doing this? And it's because of the new law that was put out about everything being standards. And I said, well, this is what's happening. And they said, why don't we get a say? That's a good point. Why don't you get a say? If you haven't seen the Disney movie Strange World, I highly recommend it. And for those of you who are throwing hate my way without knowing me or my true intentions, you may learn a thing or two from that movie. Follow your heart. Find the compassion. Find the kindness. It's the key to a better, positive life. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's Ron Desantis there, fascist Ron Desantis laughing right there. That's him in Iowa. Folks, this is the state of the modern day MAGA Republican Party. Very dangerous. We need to call it out. And, you know, Fox enables this. And even when they're going after Trump and they're supporting DeSantis for the policies like I just showed you, which are so anti-American, so cruel, so inhumane, so indecent, so against free speech. Horrific, horrific stuff. I'm Ben Meiselas from the Meidastouch Network. Hit subscribe. We're on our way to 1.5 million subscribers. Thanks to your great support. So please hit subscribe. Check us out at patreon.com/Meidastouch, patreon.com/Meidastouch. And also wherever you get audio podcasts, make sure you subscribe to the Meidastouch podcast. It is free. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day. Hit subscribe on YouTube.
Love this video? Then you'll love the Meidastouch podcast. Listen as my brothers and I break down the latest news and chat with top political leaders on the fastest growing pro-democracy podcast in the world. New episodes drop every Tuesday and Friday. Add the Meidastouch podcast right now wherever you listen to your podcasts.
The goal is ultimately the collapse of the family and the killing of God in America. Because what that does is it so destabilizes our moral and societal structures that it can then be replaced and reorganized with something different, like progressive, socialist, communist ideas. And that has always been the plan.
Hey, it's Alonzo Bowden with another Rebel HQ TYT video. And you know, usually Christianity isn't under attack until Christmas. But I guess Christmas is coming early this year. Christianity is under attack. Let's watch.
The target is always children. And that's why God gave children to parents, not to governments, not to woke institutions that are then staffed and manned by those who want to undermine the faith and values that made America great and that advanced the good. So we shouldn't be surprised that nefarious forces are targeting children.
You mean like systematically taking over school boards across the country and pushing the school agenda to the right? No, Democrats can't do that because you know what? Democrats just aren't that organized. Besides, most parents are too busy trying to keep their kid from getting shot at school to put any time into nefarious plots. But you know, there is one thing you always have at the schools after the shooting, right? Thoughts and prayers, because that's what works, right, Kirk? Thoughts and prayers. Let's take a look.
So we become Christophobic in this nation. Christianity is the number one persecuted religion in the world. And it's become de rigueur in this country to attack Christianity. I'm sure my book, some people say, well, you mentioned Christ in there. Well, of course, it is an important way. And we know that people who have struggled with trauma, that those who have a strong religious faith actually do better.
Christianity, the most persecuted religion in the world? Well, Tim, I'm sure some Jewish people might have some pushback on that statement. Even the OAN host was shocked by that one, and it takes a lot of BS to shock one of them. Now, as for your biblical way of dealing with trauma, Tim, we've been trying the thoughts and prayers after school shootings, and Lord knows we've had too much practice doing it, and it doesn't seem to be working. Now, you think Christianity is falling off, but no, Tim, that's the old Christianity, where they had rules against things like adultery and lying and stealing. This new Christianity, where anything goes, has to be more popular. I mean, your leader's on trial now for committing adultery, right? Stealing is okay. There's even some coveting being done. And we're not going to talk about lying, are we? Because then you might have to lie. Yeah, these new commandments seem like fun, Tim, but what about the old? What about the original 10? Well, let's take a look and see how that's going.
You probably know Matthew 6:5, when Jesus says, don't be like the hypocrites who love to pray publicly on street corners. When you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret. You know that in Scripture it says faith without works is what? Dead. Is dead. My concern is instead of bringing a bill that will feed the hungry, clothe the naked, heal the sick, we're instead mandating that people put up a poster.
Whoa, who is this James Tallarico guy? Could he be an actual Christian? I mean, look at him talking about you shouldn't be a hypocrite and pray publicly, but you should pray in private, you know, like it says in the Bible. And he even made her participate when he said faith without works is dead. That's right. That would be a dead religion. Instead, they should be passing bills to feed the hungry and clothe the naked. James, are you out of your mind? I'll tell you what James is doing. James is setting up his opponent to get some super PAC money in the next election, whenever that is.
Don't let the law get in the way of loving your neighbor. Loving your neighbor is the most important law. It is the summation of all the law and all the prophets. I would submit to you that our neighbor also includes the Hindu student who sits in a classroom, the Buddhist student who sits in a classroom, and an atheist student who sits in a classroom. And my question to you is, does this bill truly love those students?
I'm going to go a different direction than I think you're trying to lead me.
And James, the number one prophecy, love thy neighbor, even though thy neighbor may be Hindu or Muslim or atheist, that's inclusive. That's progressive. That, dare I say, is something Jesus would endorse. But I love what the woman said in the end. She said that you're trying to lead me in a different direction, and I'm not going, which is exactly what she would say to Jesus.
What do you make of Ron DeSantis possibly getting in the race?
I mean, I think he should get in if he's going to get in. I got in February. I'm a decisive person. I didn't need to wait on anything else. If you're going to do it, jump in and do it. And, I welcome him to the race. And I think the American people are ready to vet everyone. Yeah. And so, I welcome him to the race just like I welcome everybody else. And, let's let the American people decide.
The Republican Party is scrambling to make someone, other than Trump, their frontrunner. Especially after the E. Jean Carroll verdict, it's going to be hard to sell the guy to anyone but his own base. And with his eligibility to run possibly in question, Nikki Haley wants to make a name for herself, throwing Trump's biggest threat, Ron DeSantis, under the bus.
Keep in mind, DeSantis took $50,000 worth of contributions from Disney prior to this. He took their executives and lobbyists and put them on prominent state boards. He passed the largest corporate subsidies in Florida history for Disney in Florida right before this. So suddenly they criticize you and you're going to have thin skin and do a lawsuit that causes taxpayer dollars?
Well, every politician is crooked in a sense, especially in the Republican Party. So their scandals are no surprise, but they're quite fun to hear about, especially when it comes from someone who's supposed to be on their side. But as Trump collapses under the weight of his own actions, he's highlighting the failures of the Republican Party. The right is just extremely Trumpy now. And not only does that alienate voters, it alienates Republicans from each other. Some people will support Trump through all his many legal cases, and some won't. Some still talk about election fraud, but a lot of party members know they can't push that without having to question if they were falsely elected. And that rigged election talk only works if you lose. Some people are pushing for super far-right Christo-fascism, but some honestly believe in small government and the First Amendment. And the fracturing gets worse as Trump continues to prove he's even more of a loser than Republicans thought.
Those who are most closely aligned with the former president did underperform.
Here's why it's not Trump's fault. Trump has been being politically persecuted for the past few years now, ever since January 6th.
What is our plan? What are we running on? What do we stand for? What are we hell-bent to get done? There's no plan to do that.
He went out and did 30 Save America rallies all over the country. He endorsed something like 285 candidates. He held over 50 fundraisers.
The people who stick it out for Trump, no matter what, make voters not want to vote for Republicans. But even worse, the extremism makes Republicans not support each other. But that's their problem. We lefties rarely see the right at war with itself, so we're having a great time watching it implode. Hey guys, thanks for watching. I'm Leah Cover. Be sure to check out more of my content on The Breakdown, and I'll see you in the next video.
Listen, thanks for doing this interview. I know it's not your typical style.
Absolutely.
Have you ever met a gay person before?
I deal better with regular people.
We are back, and joining me now is the worst thing to happen to Disney since the It's a Small World ride, and the most boring, Governor Ron DeSantis.
Welcome to the free state of Florida.
Okay, let's cut this shit. Governor, you go by so many nicknames. Which do you prefer I call you? Ron DeSanctimonious? Meatball Ron? Dull as dishwater DeSantis? Trump Light? Little Ronnie Pudding Fingers? Ronald McDoofus? I can continue.
You can call me whatever you want. I mean, just as long as you also call me a winner.
Girl. No. You have become quite a star, my friend, using your evil to turn back time and make your state an unsafe place for so many.
That's just what I do.
Well, I guess my question is, are you ready to do it on a national scale?
Absolutely.
Do you have what it takes, Governor, to snatch Donald Trump's $5 weave and steal the MAGA base?
I think the country wants a change. I think they want a fresh start in a new direction.
Ron DeSantis, has fame gone to your head and made you wacky? Fresh and new is yesterday's vibe. Who needs cultural advancement, diversity, compassion, or Trixie Mattel? This country's in a slow-burning Uber X headed right back to the dark ages. And baby, you're just the heartless autocratic wannabe to drive us there. Hey MAGA, y'all take note. He's the Trump alternative who wants your vote. Hey Donald, get in line. There's a fresh new fascist trying to steal your shine. So let's go make liberal unlawful. Little drag shows and freedom to will. Say hello to a new kind of awful. Hey girl, it's time to drag this country straight to hell. Hey MAGA, welcome to DeSantis. Oh, MAGA, welcome to DeSantis. USA, get a load of him. This could be your future and it's awfully grim. Here comes our hero of the culture war. And he's got his eye on 2024. Sorry, do take a token, start drinking. Look out for the most boring new right-wing creep. And he's over that woke forward thinking. So we've come to put the country back to sleep. And I go, welcome to DeSantis. No, thank you, no. Welcome to the bigoted old tiny days where we ban all the books and we hate all the gays. Brace yourself for major small dick energy, cause it's time for a tyrant like Bonnie D. I wife and children when DeSantis runs, cause our lives are secondary to the goddamn guns. Let's go retrogress to 1953, last call for all your bodily autonomy. Sit back, relax, and listen to him spit and spew his conservative view. Embrace me, the face, which is all they do. Hey Ronnie, full of hate. You're the Chevy Stalin of the Sunshine State. Nobody likes you cause you're harsh and mean. Even Mickey Mouse is like, this queen. But say no, immigration should an end to those pesky old human rights. Cause we know that a fight for our nation till it lasts is safe for wealthy Christian rights. Finally, hey MAGA, welcome to DeSantis.
He will never ever surrender to the woke mob. I have fought the good fight.
mama. No.
Okay, bring it on.
Girl, no.
I don't even know who this woman is.
In a major victory for the left, Democrat Donna Deegan has won the mayoral race in Jacksonville, Florida, the state's most populous city, marking only the second time in 30 years that a Democrat will hold that office. Not only that, her victory means the Democrats have flipped the seat in the biggest city currently held by Republicans. The next biggest city currently run by the GOP is Fort Worth, Texas, as the Republicans continue to shed support everywhere other than deep red rural towns. Donna Deegan defeated Republican former state rep Daniel Davis, who was running to fill the seat as the current Republican incumbent Lenny Curry was term limited. Davis was endorsed by Ron Desantis, who said that he was, quote, the proven law and order conservative Jacksonville needs to tackle the city's greatest challenges and seize its biggest opportunities. Weird how the whole law and order stick doesn't really seem to be working in the party currently led by the guy contending with 34 criminal indictments. And Davis went with the same tired attacks, releasing an attack ad and accusing Deegan of wanting to defund the police. In response, Deegan released this ad.
Hi, everybody. I just wrapped up an interview about this new attack ad that Daniel Davis and the Duval GOP have out against me. And I wanted to take a few minutes to discuss it with you because I don't ever know what they're actually going to use on television, so I want to make sure that you hear the whole thing from me. You know, it's very disconcerting that they have decided to use the same old playbook. Very unimaginative, but the bottom line is it's much easier to divide, which doesn't make us any safer, than it is to unify. It's much easier to attack than it is to actually talk about issues like the fact that Daniel Davis wanted to privatize the JEA, and that's important right now because there's some bills in the legislature that may make that an issue again. So we need to be talking about those issues that affect Jacksonville. But in terms of our police officers and our safety, let me just say this, that I believe that two things can be true, and I believe a leader has to do two things. Has to be able to see from one side and has to be able to see from the other side. So while I do believe police have a very dangerous job, and I believe that we need more officers on the streets and we'll fund those, I also believe that black mamas shouldn't have to worry every time their kids step out of the house. And I think the only way we create a safer city is with more communication and not less. So you'll continue to see me take the high road, but I will continue to hold Mr. Davis accountable for the fact that he most certainly is not doing that. And I hope you will continue to be with us on this journey. Thanks.
Turns out having a candidate capable of nuance may actually be better than some MAGA extremist fear-mongering hysterically about defund the police on an endless loop. Who could have possibly guessed? But going back to DeSantis for a moment, this wasn't even the only loss for the Florida governor today. He also backed Kelly Craft in the Republican primary for the Kentucky governor's race. She even outspent the other Republican candidates in that primary 10-1, all to come in third place. She lost by 30 points, all of which is to say Ron DeSantis has the political acumen of a paper bag. And remember, all of these DeSantis endorsements are supposed to show his strength within the Republican Party. Instead, he can't seem to pick a winning candidate for his life. And in his infinite wisdom, he watched as his own window to declare as a candidate for president has come and gone, with his poll numbers plummeting. The latest Emerson College poll shows Trump with the support of 70% of respondents to DeSantis' 14%, a 56% lead. Again, Ron DeSantis is where political insight goes to die. With that said, Donald Trump isn't some shoo-in for the White House either. According to the latest Reuters Ipsos poll, Biden leads Trump 44 to 38% as his hypothetical lead continues to widen. Turns out maybe voters are souring on the guy who incited an insurrection on the U.S. Capitol, only to then go and get indicted on 34 felony counts and get found liable in an abuse and defamation case after that. Who could imagine that these things wouldn't help Trump's electability argument? But Trump and DeSantis aside, let's remember why Democrats are winning. Voters are rejecting Republican extremism across the country, even in deep red areas. From Kansas to Wisconsin to Arizona and everywhere in between, voters are letting the Republican Party know what they think about their extreme agenda, from abortion bans to book bans to LGBT bans to interstate travel bans. The Republican Party has decided to go all in on the most draconian, unpopular, big government agenda in American history, and they're losing even races like the one in Jacksonville for the exact reason. Turns out they're not capable of moderating their positions even a little bit. Meanwhile, when Democrats take power, look at what happens. The first gun safety bill in 30 years, the first infrastructure upgrade in modern American history, broadband internet access for rural Americans, the biggest climate investment in the history of the world, a manufacturing renaissance thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act, veteran health care thanks to the PACT Act, student loan debt canceled, only to then get held up by Republicans in court, out-of-pocket healthcare cost caps, insulin prices slashed by up to 70%, the government negotiating lower prescription drug prices, all while adding 12.6 million jobs and bringing the unemployment rate down to a near record low. There is a reason why Republicans are trying so hard to fearmonger about some dystopian alternate reality. It's because they know they can't win against the Democratic agenda in this reality. So congratulations to Donna Deegan and the Florida Democrats for this bright spot in what's been a difficult state for Democrats thus far. And hopefully this serves as a harbinger of better things to come in a state that Ron DeSantis has turned upside down in his desperation to launch his presidential bid. Floridians should recognize by now that Ron DeSantis isn't there to serve them, he is there to serve himself and his own political ambitions, and he's dragging the rest of the GOP down with him.
All right, let's look at, so the Durham report, this much anticipated Durham report, which was going to blow the roof off of all of the wrongdoing that was committed against Donald Trump when he was being investigated. Total nothing burger. And we're going to look at this through an interview. This is actually really interesting. Donald Trump was interviewed by fired Fox News host Dan Bongino yesterday. And Trump told 20, 30 lies about the content of the Durham report. This goes bad quick. Let's take a listen.
I'm always excited to welcome back to the show a man who hopefully will be the next president of the United States, a good friend to the show, a good friend to me personally, President Donald J. Trump. Mr. President, thanks for joining us.
Right.
Hello, Dan.
Okay, so it's off. Hello, Dan. Trump in a bad mood. Bad mood Trump is never good during interviews. This has been written about extensively. When Trump has that bad mood, he is a difficult guy. So it gets off to a notably bad start. They go right into the Durham report and the lies pouring out of Trump's mouth.
Mr. President, we got the report yesterday. Everything you said was correct. This is one of those hashtag Donald Trump was right again moments.
Is it?
Sir, you were framed. You were framed. They had no evidence of any of this from...
There is no reason to believe Trump was framed.
Your thoughts on that?
Is a very good thing for the country.
It's great when media outlets go out of business, per Trump. If you are not understanding this word salad, do not adjust your television or mobile phone or computer screen. Nobody can understand what he's talking about here.
And who was offered millions in order to try and get it confirmed.
Stick with it. I'm going to go through all of this with you in a moment. Okay, so it goes on and on and on, but let's add a little bit of reality to this. Donald Trump and Dan Bongino and others would have you believe that the Durham report exposed, quite frankly, that the real crime was even investigating Donald Trump and that Trump is vindicated and all these different things. I don't know how many of you have actually looked at the Durham report. The Durham report, in which they put all of their eggs in that basket for years. The Durham report found no evidence of any deep state plot against Donald Trump the way he claims. It does not accuse the FBI or DOJ of acting out of political bias. It doesn't accuse the FBI or DOJ of acting out of malice. It doesn't allege any criminal wrongdoing by anybody that was involved in the Mueller probe, except for one low-level lawyer who pled guilty to altering an email in 2020 of no consequence, big picture, to the investigation. The report did say some aspects of how the FBI handled the investigation, like they opened the investigation on a tip from an Australian diplomat. They relied on some uncorroborated information. They ignored elements of potentially exculpatory evidence. Yeah, there were procedural errors that the Durham report found. It is not indicative of any intentional misconduct, political bias, a deep state plot, a conspiracy against Trump, a frame up, a frame job, framing, or any of it. And none of that affected the validity of the outcome of the investigation. This is in the Durham report. And Trump and Bongino want you to pretend it's something different. The report repeated some debunked conspiracy theories that were pushed by Trump. For example, it wrongly claimed the Steele dossier triggered the investigation. That is not true. That dossier didn't even get to the FBI until September of 2016. That was month 3 of the investigation already. So if you actually look at the Durham report, you find that all of the stuff Trump is saying simply isn't true. Let's listen to just a little bit more of this interview. We're skipping ahead a little bit here.
I call him the special persecutor, not prosecutor.
All right. So there has been no wrongdoing by the special prosecutor that anybody has actually been able to point to. The idea that any Republican that actually wants to look into what happened is merely a rhino, a Republican in name only, is an old, tired grievance from Donald Trump. And the problem is, you look at the post, if you look at this on Truth Central where Trump posted it, people see this drivel. And then they post, wow, great show, great show. Trump was right, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They have fallen for it. And Bongino is one of the henchmen that pushes this nonsense on people. Look at the Durham report and you'll see Trump is lying.
And you want to talk about D.C. residents? They are victims of your abuse of power. And because of that, I am introducing articles of impeachment on you, Mr. Gray.
Why are we wasting this committee's time, the United States Oversight Committee's time, for the second time on just Washington, D.C.? I know you got stuff going on. You're trying to find, the fake informant that you've now has gone missing. I know you're busy with that.
All right, now that's funny. And in case you missed it, by the way, this is what was on the board behind him.
Fake informant that you've now has gone missing. I know you're busy with that. But I'm hoping that perhaps the Oversight Committee, if they're so worried about, federal overreach, perhaps they can start, being focused on real government oversight.
Now I know, it seems like it's a weekly occurrence that I'm singing the praises of Florida Democrat Jared Moskowitz. But today he earned every minute of that praise as he was forced to sit through yet another hearing on DC. This one following the ever-pressing issue of public urination that was held last month.
And these changes are now law here in D.C., correct?
Do you mean the revised criminal code?
Yes.
No, those are not the law.
Those are not the law.
The revised criminal code was rejected by...
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I'll talk to Mr. Allen.
Yes,
Mr. Allen, did you or did you not decriminalize public urination in Washington, D.C.? Did you lead the charge to do so?
No, the revised criminal code left that as a criminal charge.
Did you lead the charge to decriminalize public urination in Washington, D.C.?
No, ma'am.
Did you ever vote in favor of decriminalizing public urination in Washington, D.C.?
The revised criminal code that was passed by the council kept it as a criminal offense.
And you support this?
I voted for it, yeah.
You voted to keep it as a criminal offense.
That's correct. The full council.
The topic of this one ventured into the realm of running into 100 senators, and that being an advantage, I think.
Inhabiting that city, and is there any other city in the country where you're going to just bump into potentially hundreds of congressmen and 100 senators at any given restaurant or grocery store? Is there any municipality in the country that offers that level of personal access to the seat of government of these United States?
Congressman, I've already explained that I'm born and raised here, and I've spent most of my life here. I've been serving in elective office
when
for
you were
15
growing up,
years.
did you bump into government
Let me just finish,
I'm
Congressman.
reclaiming my
I have
time,
never
good lady.
been to an event where I happened to bump into 100 senators.
You've lived here.
I want to remind the crowd that clapping is a disruption. So, Chair recognizes Mr. Higgins.
Congratulations on not having bumped into 100 senators at one time. That would be horrific. But in the course of your life...
Anyway, after being forced to listen to that, when it was Moskowitz's time, he used every second to state what both his constituents and the majority of America want their elected officials to spend their time discussing. Issues like gun violence.
Why are we wasting this committee's time, the United States Oversight Committee's time for the second time on just Washington, D.C., just the district. No other state, no other issue. And why, again, are we talking about crime when we're not talking about gun violence? I just came from a hearing on fentanyl, and I had to listen to parents testify and talk about how they're losing their kids to fentanyl. Serious issue. I support the chairman of that committee's bill. The data is clear on fentanyl. But you know what else? The data is clear on gun violence. The numbers don't lie. And yet, we're ignoring it. I know you got stuff going on. You're trying to find, the fake informant that you've now has gone missing. I know you're busy with that. But I'm hoping that perhaps the Oversight Committee, if they're so worried about, federal overreach, perhaps they can start, being focused on real government oversight. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back before I recognize Ms. Boebert. With respect to the missing informant, just so you know, just to clarify, the Grassley whistleblower is alive and well. Chair recognizes Ms. Boebert.
And when that subject does overlap into a conversation on crime, then let's have a real one. Yes, involving the areas in the United States that have the highest crime rate. No, not New York. No, not LA. But the red states that shall not be named.
We've got to talk about these root causes. Number one, the fact that we have elected legislators that won't do their job and protect people by keeping these weapons off the streets. That's number one. Number two, we are still reeling from a financial crisis. And guess what? They don't want to make it better. I'm sure they all campaigned and said, oh, we're going to help out the economy post-COVID. But right now we are on a cliff over the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling that was raised 3 times under Trump, and 25% of this credit card bill that they don't want to pay was accrued under Trump, and he only had one term. And hopefully he won't have no more. Nevertheless, I digress. Let me move on. So let's also talk about the fact that just recently, I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago, we received reports that there is a staff member who's working for a Republican on this committee who has ties with and supports a white nationalist who has proclaimed himself to be just like Hitler. I don't really know what to say, except for the fact that this is a farce, all right? Because the fact is, we've got an increase in crime all over. If we really want to be real about it, let's talk about it. We're talking about D.C. right now, but the murder rates in red states like Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama have statistically exceeded those in blue states like Illinois, New Mexico, and Michigan every year since 2000.
You've written several books on right-wing extremism, including Hate in the Homeland, The New Global Far Right. I couldn't find any of your work studying left extremism or Antifa or BLM. I mean, we all know Antifa and BLM riots are responsible for $2 billion on damage across American cities.
I'm an expert on the far right because I spent the first 20 years of my career working in Germany in the post-Holocaust, post-unification surge of far-right extremism. And I know you have a hearing on Tuesday on far-left extremism.
Yeah, Dr. Miller addressed, just to let you know, this is America. We're not Nazi Germany. I am one of those that believe our First Amendment is one of the greatest rights that we have. And I also am so grateful to be an American, always believing that freedom of speech was something that we possessed until the past few years, where myself and many other Americans, Dr. Kuldorf, we found ourselves, I like you, had my Twitter account permanently banned for posting my speech, opinions, and thoughts on Twitter about COVID-19. I'd like to ask each of you, Mr. Weingarten, do you believe in the First Amendment?
Wholeheartedly.
Dr. Kuldorf?
I do.
Dr. Miller address?
Absolutely.
Mr. Turley?
I do.
Great. Well, it seems that we all share the same belief. But I'd like to ask a question, Dr. Miller, address it if I may. You're an expert on so-called right-wing extremism, including online radicalization by right-wing extremist groups. I'm just wondering, how do you consider your organization, Peril, and a good source of informing people on what they should believe and not believe when you do no study whatsoever into left extremism?
First of all, just to respond to your query about what we teach people, we don't teach people anything. We're just looking at helping them understand what the tactics of manipulation are online so they can make better decisions. We have experts who do work on environmental extremism. We have experts who work on Islamist forms of extremism. But because both under the Trump administration and the Biden administration, the emphasis has been right now on the greatest, most lethal threat, which has been determined to be far right, meaning white supremacist extremism and unlawful militias.
Well, Dr. Miller, just real quick, I'm out of time, but would you consider Trump supporters extremists?
We are worried about violent extremism, so that to the extent, not about what people believe, but to the extent that they are moving toward violence.
Trump supporters specifically.
If they're calling for violence, it doesn't matter to me who they support.
Haven't seen any. By the way, there's a great rally in Iowa this weekend. If you want to study people on the right and what they believe, you'll find secure borders, freedom of speech, no crime.
Gentleman's time has expired. I recognize Mrs. Ramirez for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Berkeley groups claiming victory over far-right protesters, and they credit black-clad Antifa for driving Trump supporters out of the park. Berkeley's mayor has a much different take on what went down.
Today, he went as far as calling Antifa a gang. 13 people were arrested in Sunday's clashes. Mugshots of 11 were released. They face a variety of charges from rioting to resisting arrest. Some from the Bay Area, but not all.
KPIX5 reporter Wilson Walker is in Berkeley with the video that shows some of those people crossing the line. Wilson?
Well, we just heard from the men and women who identify themselves as the leaders of Antifa. More on them in a moment. But first, this was a day for trying to sort out exactly what happened over here yesterday.
If we're talking about balanced and fair reporting of yesterday, I would compel you to air the 3 hours of footage
where we marched through the streets with literally no violence.
Fair enough, there were several peaceful marches yesterday, but then there was the violence. And today there was plenty of finger pointing.
Our experience on the streets was that we were defended by people who came as anti-fascists to do that.
So what can we learn from the day's 13 arrests, which ranged from battery and rioting to obstructing an officer and resisting arrest? Well, there is 38-year-old Harlan Pankow of San Diego County.
You don't know me, Holmes.
He was also arrested just 8 days ago at an America First rally in Laguna Beach. He was also once on Judge Judy, and he was arrested yesterday for public intoxication. But most of the arrests were young locals, like 20-year-old Sean Hines of Santa Rosa, arrested for obstructing an officer. His Facebook page includes a picture with the Antifa flag.
Why is Antifa all of a sudden becoming labeled as the most violent element when they were literally here with a buffer between those who were here to harm us?
But video from yesterday suggests that was not always the case. I want us to have this discussion. This Trump supporter spent about 2 hours trying to have that discussion, but as soon as police allowed Antifa to enter the park, he was attacked, chased for 2 blocks, and cornered outside a gas station. We never saw any indication that he was inciting violence, and the same goes for this man. He was also pursued by counter-protesters, beaten to the ground, and nearly stripped of his shirt before police could haul him to safety. All right, now, like I mentioned, the leaders of Antifa just spoke, and they said, we are not anarchists, we're not black bloc, we're not creating any violence out here. Don't associate us with that. Ken?
Yeah, Wilson, depends on which side you're looking at it from, but this isn't exactly something new. We've seen this before, right? Many times.
Okay, let's go back to about 2011 when you had the Oscar Grant riots, the Occupy movement in Oakland, and we were all trying to figure out who are these generally young guys that are showing up after the peaceful protest and just essentially causing wanton problems, right? Well, flash forward to yesterday, and you have what looks like a brigade of these people. I think that's why a lot of people immediately make that assumption, regardless of what's going on. I think what we've seen is sort of the black bloc folks get drawn into the gravity of this Antifa movement. It's getting hard to sort of separate them out, and it's going to be interesting, to say the least, how this unfolds as we have more protests in the months ahead. One scheduled for Berkeley just in the first week of September. Ken?
Yeah, we had good video of the violence that you had there. Violence is violence. It doesn't matter which side it comes from. I don't care what you call yourself. Protester, counter-protester, violence is violence.
It's certainly hard to tell when you're standing out here in the middle of it. I can tell you that.
Yeah. All right. Wilson Walker live in Berkeley. Thank you, Wilson.